Okay, so our final presenter today is Shelby Beyer. She is, let me move this down. She is co-owner and co-operator at Anchor Farm in Cheney, Kansas. They raise grass-fed and finished lamb and grow holistically managed seasonal produce. They are passionate about building community and soil health. She will be talking to us about her regenerative journey. And help me welcome Shelby.
Enjoy your food, because what I'm going to tell you first is a story. You don't need to take notes. It's my story. Don't compare your story to my story, okay? But you can learn from mine. So, I'm Shelby. My husband is in the back, his Brad. He is a large part of this story. He should be up here with me, but it's not his thing. When I was preparing for this, I Googled, just straight Googled, a pretty picture of a diverse ecosystem. To find this photo, I scrolled for 10 minutes, got really frustrated, and said, screw it, I'll make my own. So, clip art, and someday I'm gonna have my own photo. Someday when I'm walking through the forest or one of our Kansas native ecosystems, I'll have a photo for this. So, let's get the nerves out of the way. I'm nervous. I've spoken publicly before. This is my first time ever doing this, in this setting with these people. I'm also really excited and I'm really grateful to be here. I'm grateful y'all are here too. We call ourselves lots of things. We give ourselves titles. These are the titles that I'm happy to share. There's lots more. We're all diverse people. Some of them I've given to myself, some of them I've earned from hard work, and some of them are just ones I've accepted and adopted for myself. Brad and I have 2 children. The youngest one is 5, he's Bodie. The oldest one is 9, her name is Kimber. They are our farmers as well. They work hard on our farm, they're part of our decision making, they're part of our why, they're part of our context. I started working at a flower shop when I was 15 or 16 years old, and I've worked at several of them off and on through the years up until now. Mostly I did designing of arrangements, and even before I had official work in the floral industry, I was the kid that would take the 4-wheeler out with 5-gallon buckets to the forest, the pasture, and the ditch and harvest anything that I saw as beautiful. Sticks, dead cattails, natives, non-natives. I've put Johnson grass in arrangements, and that makes people cringe, but being able to see beauty and diversity is very important on regenerating yourself and your soil. As a kid, my parents didn't have to convince me or trick me to eat my vegetables or to try new things. That translated into a love of diverse food and flavors. Growing up, we spent time preparing, preserving, and enjoying food together. During college was the first time I had cable television, and 90% of what I watched was the Food Network when it was actually food, not reality crap. There's the other thing about nerves. That's a 4-letter word. That's one of my biggest nerves today is I like 4-letter words. I've worked in the healthcare industry for 20 years. I was raised in agriculture, and I still work in agriculture, and I've worked cows with some pretty colorful folk. Just to let you know, there might be some colorful language today, but I'm trying to moderate it. I didn't know or understand that I was a homesteader until right after this year's No-Till on the Plains. I was sitting in a Jay Fuhrer breakout session. It was about companion cropping. He was talking about his work in his research high tunnel or greenhouse. Afterwards, there was questions and answers. I think it was Shannon or somebody asked questions about using relay cropping and cover crops in a production situation. And I raised my hand and shared some experience, and then she asked me for my business card. And then a couple weeks later, I got a phone call, and it was, we want you to present as a homesteader. And at first, I gave every reason why I shouldn't. It's like, I'm not a homesteader. But I realized after I thought about it for a while, that homesteaders should have been one of the first titles on the list, because our first goal on our farm is to feed ourselves and our family. Goal number 2 is to feed our community. So Homesteader is very much a new title I've accepted. Something I'm embracing, and I think you'll see a little bit more of that why. All the other titles on there you're going to get with the story. And I just realized I forgot to turn on my voice recorder. So there we go.
AI's got that for you, don't worry.
Oh yeah, they're listening. And I might make them mad, and I don't care. So what's the plan? You also need to know before we go into the plan, I am very forward. There is a potential that there will be too much information today. I'm not afraid to talk about hard things. Give me all the hard questions, pull me to the side, call me, get my business card and call me later. Because if there's a question you don't want to ask in front of a group of people, I have no problem talking you through it, holding your hand, helping you understand how to work through something, because people did that for me. Also, sometimes my mouth moves faster than my brain. There will be moments where I need to stop and recollect. It's best for both of us. So the plan is the highlight reel. I'm going to tell you some of my story. Then we're going to go through soil health principles. I'm going to talk about things I have done, things I'm doing currently, things we plan to bring to our ecosystem in the future. And then before we move on to the next one, we have question and answer time, because it is my pet peeve. When I go to a workshop, when there's 10 minutes for questions at the end and you have 40 questions, because then you feel like you can only ask one. So I encourage questions. If we run out of time, write them down and I will answer them to the best of my ability. So currently this is technology. Currently this is Anchor Farm. You can see the kind of, I can't remember the polygon, thank you. You can see it's 20 acres. We have a dirt road on the south side of us and a dirt road on the west side of us. And you can see it's in 3 main sections. The 2 sections on the right are what we call the pasture. They're divided by 2 strands of high tensile electric fence. And then the part to, I wish I had a pointer, but the part to the left is what will be our homestead site. Currently we don't have a home there. We live 3 miles away from our farm in town. You can see the first high tunnel is there underneath a dropped pin. And then to the left of the high tunnel is an asparagus patch. Our second high tunnel that we are working on building that Google hasn't got on their screen yet will be just south of there. You can see where we've bale grazed to the right of the high, say what? Dumb question, but what's a high tunnel? Oh, that's actually not a dumb question. So a high tunnel, and actually the government folks here might answer that better. I call it greenhouse and high tunnel. I use those words interchangeably. Some people get a little bit sticky because my greenhouse has dropped. My greenhouse is a high tunnel, and the grant I got was for a high tunnel. They like titles in the government. Yeah, no, you're not. You're just working for them. But my high tunnel, I also call a greenhouse. It does not have a heater in it. We use the power of the sun. It has drop sides for airflow, and then we grow directly in the ground, and in some tubs that are directly in the ground. And it's a hoop? It's what style is our? It's not a hoop. It's Gothic. Yes. It is hooped. The engineer of the farm is back there. He does structural engineering and logistics. I do biology. You can see some compost piles. There's one in the southwest corner. There's one in the middle of the loop of the driveway. When we bought this property, there wasn't anything there, so we put on a well. We brought in electricity, and there's also sheep in this picture. They're hard to see, but to the right of the high tunnel, you can see that dark brown. That's not dead soil, that's hay. This picture was taken in the middle of the winter when we were intensively bale grazing. And then there's dropped pins there because that's one of the ways I record my soil sample sites. My farm is also a research farm. I do research for other people and for myself, and data keeping is important. So where did this start? At first, when I started preparing for the speech, I was like, oh, this started 10 years ago. And then I started having like flashbacks of memories as a child. And I thought, oh, this started at the beginning. Technically, I'm a 5th generation farmer, ... kind of. Before my family, the generations before me and my family that came to America, they were in Hanover, Germany, and we don't know what they did. But everybody up until my dad was a farmer. When my dad was a kid, they moved to town. My grandparents stopped farming, and they got a job at Cessna in Wichita. So my dad didn't farm. He worked for other farmers. When I was young, my parents bought property and started farming again. I was raised in Cheney, which is a small town of 3,000, until I was 9 years old. We were weekend farmers while we lived in town. I remember as a child, we would all pile into this crappy old truck, and we would drive out to the farm singing Green Acres is the place for me. And I thought my parents were the weirdest people ever, but now I'm that weird parent singing Green Acres is the place for me. My dad sharecrop leased our land. There was pasture and tilled land, and then there was also a creek riparian area. He leased that until I was in my teens. My grandma and my parents gardened and preserved food for our consumption throughout the year. Gardening was both for food and for beauty. It was also for joy. There wasn't just food, there was flowers. So I learned to love those things early on. We foraged for sand plums, mulberries, blackberries, cherries, honeysuckle, and morel mushrooms. Those are some of my favorite food foraging memories. My dad taught me to love hunting and fishing. Those experiences, and I didn't know it at the time, but those experiences also taught me many things about biology, ecology, and the wonders of nature's systems. I was in 4-H from elementary school through high school. We raised beef and pork in 4-H when I was young, but also as a way of feeding our family. I also showed dogs, rabbits, and was active in the gardening and horticulture and leadership aspects of 4-H. So in 2009, I graduated with my Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from Pittsburgh State University. And I came back home to Cheney. Brad and I got married in 2012. He is a born and bred city boy. It's a really good thing. And I'm going to talk more about that later when we talk about context. We bought our dream home in 2011, right before we got married. It was a very large house. It was on 5 acres, which we thought was just dreamy and wonderful. There were 25 mature producing pecan trees, grapes, cherries, walnuts, and I immediately started gardening. We bought our first cattle in 2013 and joined the family cattle business. Our oldest, Kimber, was born in 2014. That year, 2014, is when Brad built me what I call my dream garden. I'll talk about that in a little bit. In this dream garden, I first learned about no-till gardening and soil health. I also started to practice chaos gardening, mulching, companion planting, and cover cropping. Back then, I made protozoa tea in a junky old horse trough. Everybody thought I was nuts. And you know when you make protozoa tea or any other things, when it's good and when it's bad. Your nose will tell you. I would buy crappy old round bales of alfalfa from local farmers. People would laugh at me. I also used straw and prairie hay. We canned a lot of food. We froze a lot of food. We dehydrated a lot of food. And I fermented a lot of food. We got chickens. When you give a lady a chicken, she gets 20 more, and then she's got eggs for days. So we had food, not just eggs, but produce coming out our ears. And when you've put up all you can, you start giving and sharing and selling. So in this photo, the top left, or in this slide, the top left is one of the very first gardens. This one in the middle on the bottom, you can see how it kind of expanded into more, expanded outside of the beds. And then you can see the raised beds. That's the dream garden. So Brad built me raised beds because my back hurt. And they came to about hip high. And they were shaped it was shaped in the shape of an E or a 3, depending on which way you want to look at it. But instead of 3 parts coming out, there was 4. And it was amazing. That's the first chaos garden, and I really should blow up that picture because that smile's a real Shelby smile. You can see some of the bumper crops, and then that's my oldest, luckily holding the bowl very appropriately. So more pictures of that dream garden, learning to embrace the chaos. In 2013, 2014, I had some dots start to connect into a line. My experience as a nurse. I started working as a nurse in 2009. My nursing career was mostly in the ER, the intensive care unit, and surgery, and then later in supervising the medical staff of the hospital. By 2013, I was very frustrated with my job. I loved helping people. I hated the system. I saw early on that our medical system did not make people well, and they made them good customers. At the time, I did not understand why. I didn't understand that last sentence I just said. I didn't understand why almost all that was talked about was testing, procedures, and medications, not diet and lifestyle. We didn't talk about connection. We didn't talk about being social. We didn't talk about spending time outside. We didn't talk about healthy activities and hobbies. When I dismissed my patients, I would say, I'll see you at the grocery store, because I did not ever want to see them back in an ICU bed with me holding their hand and telling them, you're going to be okay, even though I knew in the back of my head there was a really good chance that they were going to die. In hindsight, I wish I would have told them, I'll see you at the farmer's market. At the end of my career, I also supervised nursing staff in the hospital, and that's when I really realized that it wasn't just how we were treating patients, it's how we were treating the system. That's when I realized how absolutely broken the system was. I felt hopeless. I felt like I had made a wrong decision. I felt like I'd wasted 4 years and a lot of money in college. I did not know what to do. When I was pregnant with my daughter, all of a sudden the doctor said, oh, you're lactose intolerant. And I said, bullshit. And I said, I have ate dairy my entire life. I was the kid that ate everything. I drank milk for every meal and never had a problem. Why? Because I'm pregnant. Am I all of a sudden lactose intolerant? I reached out. I thought it was ridiculous. I reached out to my cousin and my godmother, who is also a nutritional therapy practitioner. She urged me to look into raw milk. She urged me to look into the health of my digestive system. So I got onto eatwild.com and I searched raw milk in Kansas, and up popped Jayco Farm. Well, I already worked in Hutchinson, Kansas at the hospital, and Jayco Farm was like 10 minutes away on the way home. It was perfect. I became a customer at Jayco right then and there. In relation to human health and health of the gut, I was already fermenting, but we started having major diet changes. I switched the food my husband and I ate from our conventionally raised beef from my family to Jayco's beef. That caused some ripples in many ways. We switched to grass-fed, grass-finished beef, 0 hormones, 0 antibiotics, and I switched from reading fiction books for 90% of my entertainment to nonfiction books. Things started to accelerate at that point. So in 2015, I became a customer of Jayco, when I became a customer of Jayco, I started using the EWG's Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 produce list as a way to decrease our exposure to chemicals in our food. I was also reading some of these books and using them. Nourishing Traditions book is great. Sally Fallon Morrill, write her name down, get all of her books, just do it. And then I read Teaming with Microbes, and I'm a nerd, and I didn't understand that book the first time I read it. I've read it twice since, and I still don't understand parts of it, but it leaves me in awe every time, and I take something away from it every time. And these are just a couple, I'll highlight books throughout the whole thing. There's just a couple. I could give you 20 pages of books. In 2015, I started talking to my husband about how I didn't want to be a nurse anymore and how I was pretty adamant about that. I didn't know what to do. I told him I want to be a farmer. I think I want a greenhouse. I want to feed myself. I want to feed my family. I want to feed my community. I had no idea how I was going to do it. I tried some other career paths. I did direct sales of clean living products and kitchen tools. I learned a lot of great things from those experiences, especially about customer communication and service. At Jayco, first I was a customer, then I became a friend. The current owners are Robin and Daniel King. Robin and I were both nurses. We are both nurses, and we were both having kids at the same time. And then one day I was there, she goes, "Do you know how to cut up a chicken?" And I said, "Yeah, Grandma taught me." She goes, "Do you butcher chickens?" I was like, "Well, I've helped." She goes, "Would you like to come help us butcher chickens?" And I said, "Who? How many chickens?" She goes, "Oh, 300 to 500 in one day." And I said, "Yep, sign me up." So Jayco felt different than any other farm I'd ever purchased from, set foot on, or worked on. So then I started working for him. I went there after work one day in 2016, and Robin's husband Daniel said, "We're looking for part-time help. Would you like a job?" And I said, "Yes." And then I said, "Oh wait, I should talk to my husband first." Brad was supportive. A little bit about Jayco Farm. It was started by Ken and Judy, which is Daniel King's father and mother, in 1985. They switched to direct, he started milking in 1985. He switched to direct sales in the late 90s. Ken and Judy King passed the farm along in the last 5 years to his son, Daniel, and his wife, Robin. It's an all grass-fed seasonal dairy. No grains are fed to the ruminant animals. They do rotational grazing. They sell grass-fed, finished beef and lamb in their store. They sell pastured chicken, pastured eggs, and pastured pork, and some of my produce. I learned a lot of things the first go around at Jayco. I learned how to operate a geared roll. I learned a lot of important lessons about fencing and had electric fencing, and had a lot of attitude checks out in the field from that fence. I moved sheep, I moved cattle, I moved pigs, I moved laying hen tractors, I moved meat chicken tractors. I helped make and package yogurt, kefir, butter, butter buttons, colostrum, whole milk, wholesome delight, which is a drink they make out of colostrum, Greek yogurt, honey, apple cider vinegar, and lots of other products. I did a lot of dishes. I cleaned the store and the bathroom. I worked in their walk-in freezer, and I helped with upkeep of beehives and equipment. I learned the most from two specific subsets of things. The first was experience, both messing up and not. You can learn a lot of things out of books, but you really learn the most when you go out and actually just do it. I also learned from looking for information and asking questions. I was the kid that I never shut up. I was always asking why, how. And when you ask those questions, you learn. Ken, Judy, Daniel, and Robin shared their knowledge. They lent me books. They answered a never-ending barrage of questions, and they pointed me in so many right directions. The first book I ever read at Jayco Farm was because of fear, because I still had the nurse side of my brain that was very active and very traumatized. I was afraid of the raw milk I was drinking for my health. The Untold Milk Story was the first book I read, and it helped me. I met some pretty awesome people. I met Gail Fuller for the first time, had no idea who he was. We sat at dinner and talked. He started talking about things. I started taking notes. We went out to the pasture, and I filled, one of those little notebooks that just fit in your pocket. I filled a whole one with stuff I didn't know what it was, and I went home and just started Googling and reading. And I also didn't know this lady at the time, but sitting at that table is Christine Jones, Dr. Christine Jones. Had no idea who she was. Sat there, went out in the pasture, and again took notes. And then I realized when I got on YouTube and I looked who she was, I went, holy smokes. Anyway, it was humbling. During my time at Jayco, my husband and I learned a lot about money management, mostly from Dave Ramsey. We're not Dave Ramsey purists, but he sure helped us get in the direction we wanted to go. We paid off a lot of small and large debts and saving for what was our new dream, a farm and a home. Little did I know that we wanted to homestead. I never identified with the term homestead. I told you about that. We sold this monstrosity of a home, which was our dream home, in 2018. It was a beautiful place. We missed parts of it, especially the producing pecan trees. But we're really happy with where we are now. We moved into a small rental house and kept working, planning, growing, dreaming, and saving our dollars. In 2017, I expressed to my dad that I was going to buy a greenhouse. I'm going to figure out how to do it. And he said, hold your horses. He said, maybe, just maybe, you should go work in a greenhouse before you run yourself off a cliff. So just outside of my hometown of Cheney, there's MG on our farm. He took me there. He introduced me to Clint Brower. Clint Brower is the CEO, co-owner, and operator of MG Honor Farm and Greenfield Robotics. In 2018, I started working for him. His farm is pictured right up there. And you can see 2 high tunnels. Technically, they're greenhouses because he has wood-burning stoves with propane backup heaters and large exhaust fans, no drop sides. So I operated those high tunnels, and then you can see in that field on the left side, we grew row crop vegetables seasonally outside. And then on the farm ground all around, he also had sheep. At first, it was just monocrop tomatoes year-round in the greenhouses. We also grew quite a bit of basil for local restaurants, and by quite a bit, I mean harvesting 30 pounds in a day. It's a lot of basil. We did outdoor seasonal vegetable and herb production, mostly annually. Lots of parsley and sage were grown. I lost my place. He was not certified organic, but he did sell to Whole Foods and many other great places. I learned there that the bane of organic is tillage, and it's also a killing viewpoint. We sold to restaurants and schools at first. We also diversified while I was there. We grew inputs for pet food for a Canada pet food company, mostly vegetables and herbs that we produced, froze, and shipped to the pet food plant in Texas. While I was there, we started selling at the farmer's market in a nearby town, and we ended up with a mix of all of those things and a CSA farm membership model. I helped manage the herd of hair sheep using electric netting and also a robotic prototype movable fence. He owns Greenfield Robots. I didn't work directly for them, but I did get to help with operating robots and using robots for weed control rather than tillage and chemicals. I learned a lot about what not to do. The tillage in the greenhouse and the outdoor row crops was our #1 way to control weeds. We did a lot of other things great, but the tillage led me to see things that were happening with the soil. The soil was going backwards. We had ever-increasing pest pressure, ever-increasing disease, and we focused on spraying weekly or biweekly with organic products that were broad-spectrum killers of all biology, organic or not. I also trialed Prairie Food, which is a microcarbon product in the greenhouse on a tomato crop, and then outside on a vegetable and flower crops, and I saw visual differences in growth and yield. At that time, I also trialed Prairie Food on a small part of my asparagus patch. More pictures, more pretty pictures. I learned a lot about the consequences of growing out of your context, not just yours, but the state and the ecosystem that you lived in. For example, tomatoes in Kansas, yeah, you can grow them year-round. You're going to have to supplement with sunlight because there's not enough sunlight in February to grow tomatoes, and you're going to have a ton of pest pressure because there's nothing else there's not a lot for the pests to eat in the wintertime in Kansas. And so they're going to come to your greenhouse and you're going to have a pest party. I also started to learn how much I enjoyed having people of all ages and contexts to the farm to show them where their food comes from, to show them exciting things like biology and bugs. Oop, I just lost something. Okay, we can wing this one. 20 acres and a dream. My husband and I bought 20 acres from my father in December of 2019. on that 20 acres was 25 hedge trees and not much else. There was no fence, there was no high tunnel, there was no perennial there was an annual cover crop going. There was no perennials growing. There was no well, there was no electricity, there was nothing. Before my dad owned it for 2 years before I did. He took it out of a full tillage monocrop and fallow rotation into no-till with covers. Even when I took it over, that soil was still pretty sad. In spring of 2020, in 2020, we planted our first crop, which was asparagus. I chose asparagus because it fit in my context. I also chose asparagus because I knew I couldn't kill it. I have a lot of experience, but when you don't live on the farm and you're starting off, you got to choose something that you know will work because you need a win. I also chose asparagus because when I started pricing it, I kind of fell over. And yes, it's a perennial crop, and yes, it's worth it, and yes, you only have to plant it once. But when I was looking at the price of crowns, I thought, ooh, well, then I started talking to all my friends and family, and everybody wanted to buy asparagus. Well, when you buy 1,500 crowns of asparagus, you get it for about 20 cents a crown. So I bought 1,500 crowns of asparagus. I supplied and charged all my friends for theirs, and I ended up with about 950 crowns. And that's what that picture is right there of us planting asparagus. And then you invite all your friends over and you supply them with pizza and drinks, and then you get all of it planted in 3 hours. Our next project in 2020 was we began our fencing project. Brad is the engineer, so if you have questions, ask him afterwards. But we put up high tensile woven wire perimeter fence, and then inside the perimeter, we put high tensile electric line. So we had hot fence everywhere, and then we used reels in between to make our paddocks. I have to find my notes for the next slide. Okay. So, 2020, were we all present for that? Okay, I won't use the C word, but y'all know what BS means. We all saw a visible breakage of our current systems, and I could name 20 systems. You could probably name your own. At that time, my family's butcher beef business got real popular. We sold illegally a whole lot of ground beef before we got our license to sell retail and wholesale cuts. Everybody and their dog was reaching out, hey, you got cows? Can we butcher a cow? Can we grind a cow? Sure, let's do it. So we got our license. We started Horizon Farms Meat Company. I had experience with direct-to-consumer sales. My sister, my brother, my father, and I and our spouses worked our tails off. We also scaled up butcher beef for a little bit of scale. Currently, the butcher beef business, during the C years, the butcher beef was selling 25 to 35 butcher beef a year, and then the retail was around 10 to 15. We've slated 25 animals for retail sales for 24. So it's growing, it works, you can do it. My job at NG Honor Farm, we have 2 lockers that we have a very, very good relationship with. And if you're not butchering your own, you need to facilitate and encourage and nourish your relationship with whoever's butchering your animals, because they're part of your context and they're part of your community. I could talk more, I could give you a whole hour-long presentation on that too. But yeah, my job at MG Honor Farm ended because only about 10% of our income was coming from direct-to-consumer sales of produce. Everything else was restaurants, businesses, schools that were all shut down. I realized the need for food security for my family first, for my community second, and I saw an opportunity to serve and nourish my community. So there's a picture of my sister and I. My family's cattle business is not as hippy-dippy as my farm. We are no longer a part of the family business. We help out, but we have no ownership and we own no more cattle. But we do like to go have the family time together. At this time, I was reading The Unsettling of America by Wendell Berry. That book talks a lot about food, farming, and culture and how they're all related, and everybody should read it. It's one of my top 5. I also read One Straw Revolution, and I realized that most of the gardening and farming I'd done my whole life, I was working against nature. And that's a hard line to toe. Jayco take 2. After my job at MG Honor Farm ended, I sent a text to my friends and said, hey, if you're looking to hire, I'm looking to work. When I went back the second time, I did less work out in the field, occasional choring and stuff here there, but I did more work in their store. That's a picture of their on-site farm store, and then the picture in front of it. I did store upkeep, inventory. Their walk-in freezer is huge, and it's a management thing. It's not an issue, it's not a problem, but it's something that has to be upkept, and I spent a ton of time in their freezer. I also did their bi-weekly Wichita delivery. I loved seeing the customers in the store or on the Wichita delivery. Like, I love people. And so I really honed my skills when it came to customer service, talking with people, managing the store. And I also because I knew the owners and we were close friends, I got to see more of the behind the scenes of what it takes to run a successful business. I was kind of their Jane of all trades too, because some days I'd do childcare, and some days I'd run errands and personal grocery shopping, and some days I'd just be a shoulder to cry on or a therapist. Whatever, just throw something at me, we're gonna do it. I realized when I was working there that the second time, that part of the reason Jayco is so different is they understand the importance to work with nature. They are your business partners. Nature is your business partner, and that's what makes Jayco so different, and many other farms now. While I was working at Jayco the second time, I went to my first Fuller Field School. It was in 2021. I had already read Nicole's master's book, For the Love of Soil. That's also on my top 5, and I'll probably end up with more than top 5, so I should change it to top 10. But that book is great. It gives you actionable items that you can do on your farm and that are not overwhelming. I also met Trish Jackson. Trish Jackson was the Director of Regenerative Ag and Research for Prairie Food. When I did the asparagus trial with the Prairie Food, I had met her husband. He came out to pull soil samples. And I was tromping around the farm, just all excited, bubbly, like asking him a million questions, like as my friends say, going all Shelby on him, just soil this, that, and the other. And he stopped and he looked at me and he goes, dude, you need to talk to my wife. I was like, who's your wife? He's like, well, she has a PhD in soil science and you and her are gonna be like this. I said, okay. Well, he gave her my number. She texted me, I forgot. Ran back into her a year later and she said, well, would you like a job? And I said, yeah. Before I got the job, I hopped in bed with the government. In 2020, we applied for our NRCS high tunnel grant, and we received notice in February of 2021 that we're going to get the grant. We completed the first high tunnel project in October of 2021. I started growing for my community. I started growing for myself. I started practicing soil health principles, and I made space for research. That's not my high tunnel. That is a picture of a high tunnel a lot like mine from the place where we bought ours, which is Zimmerman's Welding. All right, research work. Back to my notes. I was hired by Prairie Food in July of 2022. We started, that's when I retired from nursing. I still have my license and I'll probably keep it forever, but I had full-time employment in ag between Prairie Food and Jayco, and not just any old ag, but ag that cared about soil health, farmer health, and regeneration. I was over the moon. We did research on my farm, inside and outside the high tunnel. I also helped with research study, planning, implementation, and data collection from my farm and other farms and ranches. I learned a lot more about soil health, about conventional ag, and about regenerative ag. I honed some skills. Some of those skills include reading Haney and PLFA soil tests, using a penetrometer to look at compaction in the soil, performing water infiltration tests, observing soil microbial activity using a soil respiration test, both lab tests, but also real-time on-farm testing, using a refractometer to measure bricks across a wide array of plants, how important field observations are. Side-by-side studies, using check and control strips, I started to learn more about what I call the free to me or the free to you tests. God gave us our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, our hands, and our hearts. Boy, I sound like 4-H. I just realized that. What does your soil smell and look like? What does the ecosystem sound like that you're standing in? I learned about the carbon cycle. I learned about the water cycle. I tried to help with sales. That wasn't the right setting for me. I got to do direct learning with people like Dr. Rick and Liz Haney, Dr. Lance Gunderson, and Keith Burns. It was humbling and exciting. So for context, for your knowledge, the picture on the bottom left, that's a water infiltration ring. That's a soil spade. It's one of the best soil testing tools I have on my farm. Look at your soil. You don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on tests to figure out what's going on. Next to the spade is a penetrometer, test compaction and PSI. And then up there, that's a digital refractometer. And I done forgot the bee people's names, but they talked about a refractometer. The digital ones are a little more expensive. You can get a simple one for like 40 bucks. In 2022, we brought home 5 ewes that were a gift from my old boss at MG Honor Farm. We also bought 20 ewes from Jayco that summer. Our first lambing was the spring of 2023. Our first butcher lamb was sold in the fall of 2023. We sold our first retail cuts in the winter of 2023, and now we are in our second lambing. Hopefully not today for for the lady that's babysitting my farm. Also in 2023 is when Anchor Farm really got going. We always knew that it was Anchor Farm. We've been talking about it for years. My husband was raised on a sailboat at Cheney Lake. I like the idea of how the soil anchors us to each other and to the rest of our ecosystem. So we got our branding done. I started growing. It was a very, very diverse operation last year. I grew all the things, when you open the seed catalog and you're like this. So it was very diverse. I continued my soil health principles. I kept 1/3 of all my growing space in a cover crop last year. And I could get produce and value add items out of the cover crops too, but I always wanted to make sure that there was soil health principles happening. My goal was to sell produce to my community and also feed myself. So I sold produce at Harmony Coffee's Roaster Shop on Main Street in my hometown, and also at the Jayco Farm Store, and also off my front porch. We fed ourselves in the last 24 months all of the asparagus my family has ate, green beans, okra, and many of the frozen greens that I use in soups and stews came out of our freezer or off our shelves. I traded with members of the community and friends for potatoes and corn. And we had fresh greens all year round. In the late summer or fall of 2023, I was overwhelmed by full-time work off the farm with research and Jayco and my vegetable production. This is part of context. I was working 60 hours a week. I didn't know how to take care of myself, and I didn't. I couldn't take care of my family very well. I had to learn how to juggle and prioritize what was best for me and our farm. I realized how difficult it can be to operate a high tunnel in Kansas when you're not there 2 days a week. So we had to start making some changes. I shut down the whole produce operation, which had been my dream since very early on, and planted everything to cover crop and said, let's make room for our farm. We also applied for a second high tunnel grant and received it, and I reluctantly let Jayco know that my last day would be in 2024. So the best laid plans, you know how that saying goes. The original plan was to do my research, which was done on my farm and in my home office, and also do Jayco Farm. Well, the second week of December, I was laid off from the Prairie Food research job. And then my last day of JACO was leap day of this year. I dealt with grief, anger, and confusion after a prairie food layoff. I also grieved leaving JACO because it's one of my favorite places. And I had to realize that my chapter with JACO, or the story with JACO was just changing to where I was no longer their employee, I was just their friend. It felt like a very scary time for me. It might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. Not just the layoff, but leaving the comfort of my family at JACO. Being in your comfort zone can be very dangerous. I've been really good at putting other work and other farms before my dreams and goals for my farm. I'm not going to do it anymore. So that's where the just do it thing comes in. I'm not big on name brands and mass marketing campaigns, but Nike knows something. You just have to do it. Do what you can where you're at. Start one thing, and that's how you're going to learn. That's how you're going to progress. Currently, we're in the middle of building our second high tunnel. Today is my first public speaking event. My friends reminded me in the last couple weeks when I expressed how nervous I was that I've already been speaking publicly because this stuff just bubbles out of me wherever I'm at. I have some farm tours on this and field trips planned for our farm. I'm excited about agritourism. I'm doing a library reading program this year. I'm consulting and brewing IMOs for other people, and then of course produce and lamb sales are happening. All right, my story's over. Whew, that's a good deal. Let's talk shop. Oh yeah, I have a note that says remember to drink something. So I met Ray Archuleta face to face this year for the first time, and we became fast friends. And there are technically, depending on which place you go to, there are 6 soil health principles. He's condensed them down into 4, so I called him one day. I'm like, would you share your slide with me? And he did. So this is Ray's slide. What we're going to do is I'm going to go through these principles. I'm going to talk about what I have done, what I'm doing now, next steps, and then you'll have time for questions. So the first one is work in relationship with human and biological community. This is biomimicry to me. You can read what I took off Wikipedia. Biomimicry means several things to me. Partnership with nature. The biology on the farm is working towards a shared goal, and that goal is more life and more diversity. Death, rebirth, and recycling are all a part of nature. You have to remember that. If something dies, it was probably meant to die, or it wasn't growing in the right context and didn't have what it needed to live. That includes you. And connection. Everything's connected. Working in relationship and connection is something I have to remind myself almost daily still, especially if I get stuck in any old patterns of thinking about business, farming, relationships, or connection. Context. Context is connected to everything. I'm going to say a lot of the same words, I've just realized. It's dynamic. That means it's always changing. You're going to be continually learning about your context. You're also going to be continually unlearning misinformation or old patterns that you've had when you start doing regenerative agriculture. You have to learn how to adapt, whether you're grazing, whether you're growing cover crops, whether you're growing produce in your garden, whether you have new bugs to deal with. You're going to have to adapt, and that's part of your context. Context has been the hardest thing for me to understand, to accept, and to utilize. I highly recommend you think about your context before you do anything else. Mine includes, but is not limited to history, my history, the land I live on history, ecology, where you live, what it's like, culture, social life. Goals are very important. Time. Be realistic with your time. Oh, back to your goals. Talk about them. Talk about them early, talk about them often, realizing that it's okay to change them and that they will evolve with you and your homestead. Context also includes finances, health, mental, spiritual, and physical. If you get overwhelmed and burned out, it's not good for your farm. It's not good for you. Burnout is a very real, very dangerous thing. It's part of why I lost it last summer. I wish I would have listened to those that told me to early on to learn my context. I had a lot of unlearning to do in the last 10 years, and I've done a lot of it, which is Brad didn't have as much unlearning to do because he's a city boy. Asparagus, I think I already talked about the context of asparagus and why we started with asparagus. This is an example of my context. So you can see the star, that's where I'm located. I'm in a mixed grass prairie, even though I'm in a non-prairie setting. I don't have native pasture. I have tilled land that I'm rehabilitating into pasture and growing space. You drive an hour east of me, you're in tall grass prairie. You drive an hour west of me, you're in short grass prairie. I'm in the South Fork of the Nenasko watershed. We are just south of Cheney Lake. I spent a lot of time in the North Fork and the South Fork of the Nenasko and in Cheney Lake, and I see how they've changed in 20 years. And then you can kind of see where we're at just off, that's 54-400 highway. Wichita is just a smidge that way, but that red dot, that's where we're at. So when you look at the map and you think about context, you need to think about the history of your location. What grew there 100 years ago? What grew there 200 years ago? What biology? What plants? What animals? What soil is there? What plants and animals were there but are no longer there, and how did they affect your soil and your ecological situation? What zone are you in? I'm 6B. What's here? Is it 6B or 6A? 6B. So you're not probably going to grow healthy citrus trees in 6B. It's the wrong context. You're probably not going to grow agave and make tequila either. You're not going to have very many ferns because this is not the rainforest. Growing tomatoes works here in context and in season. Doesn't work so great in January in a greenhouse. Cotton is grown in Kansas, and it's not grown well. It's not supposed to grow here. You can push your zone with season extenders like row covers, high tunnel, low tunnels, cold frames, etc. I use all of those things, but I'm not using them in January to grow tomatoes. What seasons are you in? Spring, summer, fall, and winter? How do you feel about working in all of them? Do you like them? If you don't, can you not work in one of them and let your farm and you rest? It's okay to rest. Remember, nature rests. Rainfall. Are you relying on rainfall only? Are you going to irrigate? How are you going to irrigate? What's it going to cost? What time is it going to take for you to irrigate? What's your soil type? Where I'm at, I am Shellbogger sandy loam and sandy loam. It's pretty nice soil in the grand scheme of things. I know friends that are farming subsoil. I have friends that are farming subsoil and have made huge gains turning the subsoil into topsoil. It's doable. What watershed are you in? I already said that. All right, questions about context. It's time for y'all to wake up and ask me some questions. Anybody have any questions? Okay. Context questions can be the hardest for many reasons. If you have context questions, grab my card and call me or email me. We can discuss them because not a lot of people want to talk about some of these things in front of a group or with strangers. So the next thing is to limit chemical, physical, and biological disturbance. So physical disturbance, the first one is tilling. Early on in my gardens, I would till, and then I would mulch it as like a Band-Aid, like, oh, I'm so sorry. Here you go. I'm gonna protect you now, even though I didn't protect you before. We built the raised beds. The first small raised beds are when I stopped with tillage. At first it was hard because my soil was really, really compacted, and planting directly into compacted soils is hard. Then we had the big raised beds, and I had full implementation of ground cover with mulch and with plants, using minimal or no disturbance. I was amazed and scared by the amount of biology, bugs, mice, and birds that showed up in that first chaos garden. I still thought at that time that they weren't welcome. Like my mind was still, how do I get rid of them? Not how do I welcome them and create a home for them? So at MG Honor Farm, The bottom right is a picture of the greenhouse before we transplanted tomatoes, full tillage. It was sad, and I didn't know how sad it was at the time. And we would weed and hand pull weeds, hoe and hand pull weeds, or use black landscaping fabric to keep the weeds at bay until the tomatoes reached canopy. Once the tomatoes reached canopy, if the weeds grew, they just stayed little. The top right picture is a picture of greens that were planted into a deep tilled bed with a pinpoint seeder, and it worked. You had a nice prepared seed bed that didn't have weeds, but we also had disease and crops, and the next season you couldn't plant anything into it because it was compacted and you have to till it again. When the tomatoes were in the greenhouse, I chose to ask for forgiveness and not permission. And I planted greens under the tomatoes. Once they got about this tall, we had them trimmed up to about 3 foot off the ground, and there was airflow, and the sunlight would come in on the east side and come in on the west side. And I planted greens under there and brought in another value stream. And light bulbs started going off in our head like, oh, we could put more crops in the same square footage, have healthier soil, and this is gonna work. Stuff started turning. We had other benefits of having those crops under the tomatoes for like soil coverage, protection, and moisture retention. So this picture, it's a picture of tarping, but it's actually a picture of strip tillage, and you can see where the crops are. We would till in strips, so that would be tilled so we could plant into it with the direct pinpoint seeder. And then in between, we would have just grass that we would mow, so we had a pretty walkway. Well, we'd aerial water, and I'd watch the water pool where we tilled and planted, and we would have moisture and fungus issues. But in the grass in the middle, there was no pooling. The water just soaked right in. My observation on all of these photos overall is that the weeds and the water infiltration got worse, and it all had to do with soil compaction. Any questions so far?
So you're saying no to it then?
Yes. Her question was, so you're saying no-till is better? Yes. The least amount of physical disturbance that you can do, especially if there's a metal implement of any kind in your hand or you're sitting on top of or pushing, the least amount is better. In nature, physical disturbance happens, but it doesn't happen like the way we do it. Animals come in. Actually, we're going to talk about that before I go.
Wind, water, and animals.
Yeah, fire, wind, water, animals. And it doesn't happen all the time. It happens, and then nature gets to rest and refurbish. So these are pictures of my operation today. Tillage is often the chosen alternative to chemical weed control. So in this photo on the left, it shows me using tarps to terminate a cover crop. After we pull those tarps off, I use what's called a broad fork. So when we formed these beds when we built the greenhouse, we brought in big equipment and did dirt work. That dirt work helped compact my soil. I had made some strides in soil health, and then when you bring in a skid steer and a high loader and you level dirt, you make it all ready to go for building, and then you go up and down building stuff with scaffolding, you make for sad soil. And so I did till the soil the first go around. Once we started growing, I took a tiller in there, it was all compacted down, I had no way to make beds, so I tilled the soil. Tillage is a tool that you need to know when you should and shouldn't use. And so I tilled the soil, and then I formed my beds. In the walkways, me and the kids and Brad and I, we took a shovel and we piled topsoil onto the beds. So they were just a little bit elevated. And so you can see where the cover crops were tarped, and then we go into these beds with a broad fork. This is disturbance. This is a physical disturbance, and the reason I use it is because it's a gentle physical disturbance, and it promotes for airflow and water infiltration. Because of what happened when we were building the greenhouse, I still have problems with compaction, and also because of the way my land was farmed before I got there is a hard pan about 10 inches down. The first couple of years that we grew cover crops with tillage radish, the radish, which looks like a daikon radish, the radish should go down, and at about 8 inches, it go whoop, and that's not a good sign. So I use the broad fork, and it has those big long tines on the beds about every 8 to 12 inches. You stick it down in the ground, you get on it, you go like this, you get it down in there, and then you go forward, and then you go backwards, and you pull it up, and you step forward, and you do it again. I don't need to go to the gym, folks, and neither will you. So then after I use the broad fork, I top dress my beds with compost and or worm castings. That's the 5-gallon buckets. And then I use what's called a tilther. Not a tiller, a tilther. A tilther is a DeWalt drill, or whatever your drill of choice is, driven device. It looks like a tiller, but it hits the top 1 or 2 inches. It is how I create a prepared surface that I can either direct seed into, use a direct seeder into, or hand transplant. Since it only hits the top inch or 2, it preserves the soil structure below. And then, well, you can see the tray. We pull plugs out and direct hand transplant into there. There will be a day that I no longer have to use a broad fork. Out in my asparagus patch, if I put a broad fork in the ground, it would just fall over because it's that soft and spongy. That broad fork can also be used out in your garden. We haven't started a huge outdoor, oh, yes, question.
I don't want to interrupt or anything,
No.
but I'm getting ready to buy a house, actually over here by the rose garden and stuff, and I want to do a garden, but we have pretty thick grass.
Mhm.
Can I just right into the grass? Is that going,
With roses,
no, with like vegetable garden?
if I were you, I would tarp the grass to kill it. I would plant a diverse cover crop and wait, be patient. I would tarp the cover crop to terminate it and let it decay back into the soil, and then I would start your garden. That's what I would do.
About cardboard and some kind of hay and
Yep,
all that, and just poke a hole and
that's, you took the words out of my mouth. So he asked about using cardboard and hay and then poking a hole. So when we move to our farm, I'm going to start a whole lot of outdoor growing. Right now my focus is sheep and greenhouse. And the asparagus patch, but it maintains itself. When we do our outdoor growing space, where we're growing right now is technically the pasture. Last year I seeded milpa after the sheep had grazed it off, and so we're working on soil health. But the way it will look when we go to make our outdoor beds is I will either tarp it or I will put cardboard down. I have a compost pile I'm working on now. We'll put cardboard down. We'll put the compost on the top and directly plant into it. That cardboard will break down, it will feed the biology, and you can broad fork straight through all that. So
Would that be a good idea for me for the first year? Kind of plant through
depending on the type of grass you have.
outdoor type.
Let's talk more about your grass afterwards. So these are more pictures from my farm. The top left is a strawberry patch my husband and I and the children planted, was it last weekend, honey? You know, the 50-mile-an-hour wind. That was fun. It was better than building a greenhouse in 50-mile-an-hour wind, though. But we planted the strawberry. That strawberry patch was tarped for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks with an old silage tarp, black side up. It's going to get mulched tomorrow or the next day with that prairie hay that's been sitting there being bug habitat. And what we tarped to terminate was not just annual native plants, what people call weeds. It was the perennial mix that we have in our pasture, and so the tarping works to knock those back. So to plant the strawberries, we used that hand cultivator. Does anybody have grandma's old hand garden cultivator? So I use the heck out of this thing. It is a disturbance. It's how I get seed in the ground, or I make a furrow quickly and easily without tilling the whole shebang. And so We pulled the tarps off, we pushed the cultivator through so we had furrows and plopped the plants in. So that picture is a good picture of our asparagus patch. You can see wood chips decaying, you can see dead plant matter from last year decaying, you can see annual natives growing, those are called weeds. It's a good example of what's happening there. There is always a living root in this patch. Last spring, I tested the soil in the asparagus patch along with everywhere else on the farm. We started with an organic matter on the farm at like 1.1 to 1.7, depending on where you're at. We've made gains, even with drought, across the whole farm. When I tested the organic matter originally, the tree row organic matter was 3.8. That's my first goal, is to get to where the tree row is, because it hasn't been disturbed and nature's been doing the thing. That soil is soft, spongy, gorgeous in color. You walk 5 foot away, it's not the same thing. But when I tested the asparagus patch, I already knew, I kind of had an idea of what was coming back, because when you walk through my asparagus patch, it's spongy. And there's spots that they kind of depress with your footprint. That's how soil should be. When you walk through the forest, you get that feeling. That's how soil should be, healthy soil. And so when I realized where the asparagus patch soil was at last year, I had, a light bulb moment, use it as your garden. And so in between the asparagus rows, they're on 5 foot centers, I planted my outdoor garden last year. Tomatoes, herbs, flowers, greens, root vegetables, alliums, garlic and onions. I can't remember what else. We would weed by hand, weed with a torch, just to get them up to canopy, and then we would let the weeds go. So we could get up and down the roads, and then we had habitat everywhere else. Drives people crazy. It's chaotic. It takes some learning to get used to, but it does great. Next year, we're going to be using a flame weeder like that. There's a farm called Never Sink Farm. You can follow them on social media. You can find them on YouTube. I've learned a lot from that farm. His name is Connor Crickmore. He's a patient and kind man from what I can observe, and it's really good to learn from him. So out in the pasture, we don't do that. We do the top one. That's a no-till drill. It's what we planted our perennial grazing mix. It's what we plant our annual cover crops in the pasture. That's called pasture cropping. We do 1 to 2 of those a year. We rent that tractor and the no-till drill from my dad. We don't own any equipment on my farm except for handheld equipment. We have no tractor, we have no skid steer. You can rent a lot of equipment and tools from the government, from NRCS. Did I say that right, NRCS? The Conservation District, yeah. There's so many things under one umbrella. The NRCS, the Conservation District, they have great resources and tools that you can use. Last year, we thought that we needed to mow in our pasture, the standing stuff that our sheep left, or that we didn't force them to eat. That was a waste of time on the tractor, it was a waste of money and fuel, and it was another compaction event that was not necessary, because little did we know when we went to plant our cover crop, that drill knocked it all down. And if it doesn't knock it all down, standing carbon, standing debris in your pasture, in your system, it catches snow and it provides habitat. It's super exciting to now know these things. My goal in the future is to learn how to use a roller crimper. So that roller crimper is for a large scale production. I want to learn how to use one in my farm, because there's a lot of times in my greenhouse and in my gardens where I have a cover crop standing and I don't want to terminate with tarps, because if I'm going to grow something like tomatoes, I just need to keep it down and get the tomato going. And once it gets a canopy, we're good to go. So if anybody has any resources on small roller crimpers, I'm talking like 40 inches wide, we need to talk. The other thing we use for termination is animal impact. Right now we're harvesting asparagus. There is a whole lot of wild lettuce growing in my asparagus patch. Yeah, it's a weed, but guess what loves wild lettuce? Sheep. They will eat the heck out of it as long as it's not too mature. We also have bindweed. Guess what eats bindweed? Sheep. So chemical disturbance. I want to say what? We don't run them. Okay, so we don't run them through the asparagus patch when we're harvesting asparagus. We wait until we're done, which will be in about 4 weeks. And then the ferns, they will nibble on them, but they don't knock. And if you push them and they don't have anything else to eat, yeah, they might eat your asparagus. But we don't push them super hard when they're in there. And they have so many other things to eat that they like, they go after that first. We're going to talk about chemistry. I hate the word chemicals. Chemicals are everywhere. You are chemicals. That tablecloth is chemicals. The flowers have chemicals. The hard knee-jerk reaction to the word chemicals is not a healthy reaction. I like the word chemistry. Chemistry is also everywhere. Dopamine and serotonin are chemicals. They're also very important for your brain and your body. Let's stop talking about chemicals and start learning about chemistry. Knowledge is power. What it can do for you, you need to know what chemistry can do for you, what it can take away from you, how it can alter your ecosystem and your life. You also need to keep in mind that there is a lot we don't know about chemistry, especially if they're chemistry or chemicals that have come around in the last decade or the last 5 decades. If something is new, be wary. That doesn't mean don't do it. It means learn more. Be cautious. So the tarping is what we use instead of herbicide. I haven't used any herbicide on my farm since day one. That's actually a lie. I just lied to you. Sorry about that. I am trialing an herbicide that is made out of acetic acid on my farm as a research project. It's called Contact Biosolutions. It's called Firehawk. I've used it before on Johnson grass and cockleburs. I'm really excited. Part of the trial that I'm doing is we're looking at not just the Haney and PLFA soil test, but we're doing DNA testing on the soil before and after to see how this product works, and that's exciting. If you bring tools of chemistry into your operation, onto your farm, onto your homestead, look at who created it and why they created it.
I understand vinegar will kill sulfur.
Yes. So I did a lot of natural herbicide at MG on our farm with vinegar, Dawn dish soap, peroxide, orange oil, not all together, but in different ratios. And it would knock plants back. Sorry, I squirreled there for a minute. So an example of a good mindset shift that I have is when people were like running around with hair on fire. Oh my God, you have bindweed in your asparagus. Oh my God, you're gonna have to spray. And I was like, well, I've walked around in nature and I've seen asparagus growing in a multitude of settings wild, and it does just fine. And it tastes great. So let's just put on the brakes, take a breath, and see what happens. So chemical and biological disturbance. Everything under greenhouse is stuff I've used either in my operation or at MG Honor Farms. Currently on my farm, I own the following chemistry. BT, castile soap, essential oils, diatomaceous earth, spinosad, kaolin clay, and sulfur. The neem oil I don't plan on using it because it and pyrethrins both are broad spectrum killers. I don't walk onto my farm and say, what can I kill? I walk onto my farm and say, how can I promote life and diversity? And if I'm going to use a product, I don't want something that's going to broad spectrum kill everything. I want to target whatever I think my difficulty may be. These tools are needed less when you're growing in context. My need and use of these tools has decreased substantially in the last 12 months because I brought in habitat, cultured and supported diversity of the whole ecosystem. A hard lesson we had was with mice. I was taught to fear mice as a child. And so when we were overrun with mice in our camper on our farm and everywhere else because it was cold and it was warm in the greenhouse, so they came inside to be warm, have shelter, and to eat, and so they multiplied, we had a lot of mice. I didn't want to deal with a cat at the time, and so we poisoned the mice. Big mistake. Because guess what we didn't have the next year? Snakes. Don't love snakes either, but I love their place in the ecosystem and I love what they do. Finally, at the end of this past summer, we started seeing snakes come back and we got a cat. Rabbits. We see more rabbits than ever before. They have a lot of habitat at our place. We have a burn pile that just keeps growing, and that's great habitat for them. We have coverage out in the pasture. Some people worry about rabbits and greens, and yes, rabbits will eat greens, but I've adopted the mindset of there's enough abundance on my farm for all of us. They don't get into the greenhouse as much because the drop sides still are like 10 inches above the ground and we can close the doors. But even out in the asparagus patch last summer when I grew greens, there was no rabbit damage. Quail. When we first were at the farm, we never saw bugs, we never saw snakes, we never saw mice, we never saw birds, we definitely never saw quail. And for a girl who grew up loving to eat quail and pheasant, that's sad. We saw one here and there the first year, and then we saw two, and then two turned into a couple babies, and now when you walk out in the pasture, almost every time a covey of quail will fly. And that's 20 acres. Could you imagine what would happen if me and all my neighbors did that? We could eat quail once a week for dinner. The last synthetic nitrogen application was in 2021. We didn't stop cold turkey, we weaned down. That's out in the pasture with the cover crops and the sheep. Part of the reason we did that was we were trying to ensure that we had feed for our sheep. We don't use any pesticides, synthetic or otherwise. That includes on alfalfa aphids. This year we had alfalfa aphids. I thought about spraying sugar water because sugar water will kill aphids. But then I realized that we were moving the sheep on very quickly and we had plenty of other forage, so we just let the alfalfa aphids have a heyday. The alfalfa recovered. The sheep came back, there was plenty to eat. Sometimes it's all about just taking a breath. We don't use any herbicide. We like native annual plants on our farm for the most part because our sheep are not real picky. They'll eat a lot of things. One of their favorite thing is also mare's tail. Currently my soil is in its mare's tail era. Mare's tail like exploded last year, and the sheep don't always eat the top of the mare's tail, but they will strip every little piece all the way down, and then you have a stalk standing for habitat and to catch snow when it snows. So mare's tail is a good thing. Questions? How's my time? Okay. Okay.
Talk about bricks, why it's important.
Yes. Preface. I understand bricks. I've studied and used bricks a lot. I am not a bricks expert, but I can point you in the direction. However, actually the Understanding Ag, if you go to their website, they have a lot of free resources on bricks. But we test bricks. Bricks measures the solids in the sap of your plant. And a higher bricks means a healthier plant. It also means you have healthier soil. Pests like lower bricks plants. So if you get your soil healthy and you get your plants healthy and they have more solids in their sap, means your bricks is higher, you're headed in the right direction. Does that work for you?
And then again, if you have higher bricks,
If you have a
plants are healthier and your soil's healthier, and pests don't like it.
Yeah, pest-like plants with lower bricks, which is why one of the reasons we do soil health, because it helps the plants be healthier, and then you have less pest pressure. And I have seen this in action. When I first learned about this, I said, oh, bull, whatever. That's just sciencey talk, not actually implementation talk, and it's real.
After chemical fertilizer and anhydrous, how long does it take for worms and things to come back?
How long does it take for worms to come back after chemical application and anhydrous? I can't give you that answer. When we first farming, I didn't go out and dig down into my soil like people told me to. I know now that when I dig down into my soil, there's worms. We started this journey in 2019. I probably didn't dig into my soil until 2020, and that was a mistake. I don't know, because I didn't dig down into my soil. We stayed on top of it, we observed, we planted, we pulled soil samples, but I didn't actually dig into my soil until 2020. So that's another good thing, is get into your soil. Observe where you're at so you know where you're going, and you know what you want to do. And when you have success, you'll know it. But I can probably tell you who could tell you the answer to that. And it,
I think a lot of people don't realize anhydrous stuff gets rid of a lot of good out of the.
yeah, anhydrous kills a lot of things. I know that for sure. I learned that when I worked for Prairie Food. And also part of that question is related to context. How much rain did you get? What other soil health practices are you doing? Because it won't be a one answer for everyone as to when the worms will return. So cover and feed this. Oh, any other questions? It's called Never Sink Farm, and his website is Never Sink Farm and Never Sink Farm Tools. Welcome. You can also find him on YouTube. So cover the soil with plants, integrate diversity of microbes, and insects and animals. Cover the soil with plants. I think I've covered most of this. You've seen that picture a million times already. These pictures are from MG Honor Farm. The one in the middle is basil, and you can see the weeds. We would just rake them to slow them down, or hoe them to slow them down, but not necessarily worry about getting them completely out, or we would weed trim them with a weed eater until the basil got up, and then we were fine. You'd have a random piece of grass here and there, but it worked just fine. There was some anxiety with my boss when this was happening. And it's normal to have anxiety when you're just trying new things. Just keep trying. And then this is in our outdoor planting. We had lots and lots of squash. And so we would hand weed around the hills where we planted the squash, and we would weed trim around them until they got up and big. And then after that, we were off to the races. And there was grass and Kansas annual natives growing all over the place.
How do you keep squash bugs at bay?
Squash bugs.
I cannot grow squash at all because I can't.
So the question is how to keep squash bugs at bay. The first answer is know when to raise the white flag. Squash bugs are something I'm still struggling with, and we had less squash bugs last year than ever before, and I attribute it to the health of my soil. But some of the tools I use is rotating where I grow the squash. Some people say it confuses them. Honestly, nature and biology is so smart, they're always going to find you. I've been told by people not to mulch my squash plants. I say bull honky. If you don't have growing stuff or mulch around them, you have other problems. And so I mulch, and I haven't seen any difference in squash bug pressure.
I tried the whole wood board with the diatomaceous earth.
Mhm.
And, I
So diatomaceous earth I use still, and kaolin clay in rotation if I'm serious about selling squash. For me, we don't can squash and we don't freeze squash. So squash is only a seasonal eating item, and so we enjoy it when we can and then we let it go. One thing we did when we were growing large amounts of squash is we had a little handheld vacuum and we would vacuum the squash bugs. The other thing that's really important when you're growing squash is to do daily or every other day bug checks. And so what I do when I do that is I look on the undersides of all the leaves and stems and I knock off the eggs, and if I see bugs, I squash them. I'm sorry, diversity. Like, I want other diversity, and that's just, I'm not that crunchy yet. I'm not gonna be like, hey, squash bug, you're my friend, please stay, because I'm not. So, yeah. And diatomaceous earth works. You have to start using it early on. And then kale and clay also helps. Those are my best advice, but the best one is know when to raise the white flag and get your soil healthy.
Praying mantises or ladybugs or anything like that either?
I don't know what eats squash bugs. I don't know. I've Googled and learned and read a lot about bringing predator biology in, but I've never really seen anything about squash bugs. Yeah, chickens. Yeah, chickens probably eat the heck out of them. I mean, there have been times with my kids where we're overrun with grasshoppers last year, and I said, I'll give you a penny for every grasshopper you put in this jar. And then we'd go feed them to my friends' chickens. So when the soil is covered, whether it's by plants that you plant or by plants that nature plants, it's cooler, it's protected from wind and rain erosion, and the soil biology is fed and protected. If you were standing out in the summer with no clothes, no food, and no water, how would you feel? You have to protect the livestock that is below your feet, and that's the biology of the soil. Okay, so that picture on the left is a research study that happened in my greenhouse last summer. The white fence post is the middle. So on the left is cover crop that I planted, and then we also let the native seed express themselves, meaning I didn't weed. We had cover crop and weeds. On the right, it was native seed expression. We planted no seeds, we just watered, and we let nature do its thing. I terminated that cover crop with a tarp in the last, I weed-eated it, took it all the way down to the ground, scalped it, and then I terminated it with a tarp. When I pulled that tarp off and I watered that plot, I should say when I weed-eated it, there was nothing growing on the native side because we had just come out of winter and there was winter kill. But on the left side, the cover crop was still growing because they were cool season. And so after I pulled the tarps off and watered it, I observed what happened. And I didn't need a water infiltration ring to know what was happening. The side that had the cover crops, the side that had roots the longest and the most diversity, sucked that water right down. The side that was bare all winter long, that water started running off in 3 minutes and pooling elsewhere. So it was another big aha moment. The middle picture on the top is an example of the cover crop that I tarped in the earlier photos with the cinder blocks. I planted that by hand. I just hand scattered it, and then I tamped it in with a shovel, or not with a shovel, with a rake to make sure I had good seed to soil contact, and then I threw out my drip lines. So this photo down here at the right is an example of a bed after it's been terminated by tarping. I actually messed up in this photo. What I should have had ready as soon as I pulled the tarps off was head lettuce to go in so I would have living root. That didn't happen. Planning. But what is waiting to grow on those stakes is cucumbers. And so now I have head lettuces planted. The cucumbers will trellis up those lines that are hard to see, and then I will plant head lettuces at the bottom. And then this bottom photo is a photo of our pasture in June or July. You can see chicory, alfalfa, annual natives or weeds, plus warm season cover growing. It's pretty diverse. It's kind of fun to walk through when you have plants up to here and there's bees and there's birds, and you put the sheep into a paddock and you can't see them at first because they're in there. It's awesome. Currently, I'm working through my brain for future plannings of figuring out how to burn our pasture area to aid in the expression of perennial native grasses. And because when you mimic nature, occasionally there was fire. So feed the soil with plants. Just what the heck is an exudate anyway? Thank you, Wikipedia. I'm also really happy that Wikipedia is now acceptable, because the last time I made a PowerPoint, which was college, you couldn't use Wikipedia. I'll let you read that. Here is my explanation. Plant leaves are solar panels. They capture the free resource and energy from the sun, and through photosynthesis, they create exudates. Exudates are sugar. No joke. Go pluck a corn plant out of your garden and touch the tip of a root to your tongue. It will taste sweet. I went to a conference. I drank the Kool-Aid. I walked out into the field, plucked a corn root, and licked it. Exudates are carbon. Sugar is carbon. The plant puts these exudates out through the roots, and that feeds the biology of the soil. You know, there's a saying that everything likes chicken. Like when you start growing chickens, everything likes to eat chicken. Well, in the soil, everything likes to eat carbon. Diversity is key. One of nature's jobs is to cycle carbon. And so when I talk about diversity, there's a picture of native prairie plants and all of their different roots. Do you see diversity there? They're putting out different exudates at different levels and feeding a whole host of biology. Also, it just highlights the different roots, different biology, different exudates. So more example of feeding the soil with plants. This picture over here of my daughter and I is this past summer. I walked out and I pulled that tillage radish out, and it was kind of straight. And I was excited. We're getting places. It was also huge. And I don't know the science behind this, but Gail Fuller tells me that once you can grow good radishes, your soil is headed in the right direction. One thing I do know this year is last year, we're waiting on our soil test this spring, but last year is the first year that my pH was in normal range, because I've been acidotic since day one. On the ladder, those are tomato plants I'm holding, and you can see their stems all the way down. I grew them in tubs in the ground in the high tunnel, and I have them trellised on line that I can let out, and I lower them down, and the tub that they start in will be over at Shannon, and then I lower them and lean them so I can keep them at working height. And then when I took them out, I think the tallest one I measured was like 55 feet long. So this is indeterminate tomatoes. Those tubs, that soil was pretty rough because I scooped it up with a skid steer and I shoveled it into the tub, and I incorporated some worm castings as I'm sorry, here's a Band-Aid. And then we grew in it, grew cover, grew tomatoes, grew lettuce. That soil this spring is already so much better because of all of the roots that were in it from the tomatoes. When I terminated my tomatoes and pulled them out, I didn't yank them out, I cut them and I let them be. And that's another picture of a tillage radish in the high tunnel.
What's your target pH?
Me, 6.8. Around 6.8, 6.87. I've been told by many people that a lower pH is better for seed germination. I've been making my own seed starter soil with topsoil, worm castings, agricultural limestone to balance the pH, but I'm following a loose recipe and not testing the pH, and I have seen changes in germination between batches. Mostly because I'm not like a super let's measure exactly kind of girl. We'll just get it out there.
Do you test it with your pH on your own pH strip?
I have the ability to test with pH strips, but what I'm mostly talking about is when I pull my soil test and send them to the lab.
Okay.
But I thank you for asking that. I should be using my pH strip test on my potting soil.
You don't, all you do is water, you don't add any acid or nothing to your water.
Mm-mm. I add things to my water, but we're going to talk about that when we talk about adding biology. So our perennial crops are the pasture, the asparagus, and the strawberries. In between the asparagus, I let the natives grow. We put in more diversity like flowers, edible crops. In the future, we plan on bringing trees, nut and fruit trees, flowers, shrubs, both for beauty, flowers, and for eating, herbs, native edible plants. Currently, I'm growing microgreens. That's that tray, or that photo, in soil in trays. The level up for microgreens is for me to move those out of trays and grow them directly on the bed. So soak my seed, put them on the bed, let them grow so there's roots feeding the soil, and then harvest them off. That's the level up near future goal. Any more questions before I move on?
Where do you get your seed?
I buy seed from a lot of places. The first place I go is Hillside Feed and Seed in Wichita, Kansas. They pull seed from a lot of different places. I plant at small enough scale that their prices are just about the same as if I ordered online. I like Baker Creek, I like Southern Exposure Seed Company, and those are just the ones that are popping into my head right now. I've also ordered a lot of seed from Johnny's. I've had a lot of good customer service from Johnny's. So this is one of my favorite parts. Integrate diversity with microbes. Microbes are magic. Magic can't always be seen when it's happening until you see the results and you go, oh, magic. Last year we bought a super tote of worm castings for our farm. I top dressed all the beds, all the tubs. I side dressed the asparagus. I spread it in the pasture. I put it through the drill. It works. When we planted cover crop, I made casting tea. I ran it through the drip lines. We put it in handheld watering cans. My husband started our own worm farm in our bedroom that year, which is great family fun. Well, we live in a small home, and the worms got to be warm in the wintertime and not too hot in the summer, so they just came and lived in our bedroom. Believe it or not, it didn't stink, and it's a good conversational piece at dinner. Yeah. This year we've only brought in like 5 or 6 bags of worm castings because we did so much with worm castings last year. I'm still making tea, dressing my seedlings with it. I'm letting my plugs carry biology into the beds. We're putting it through our drip lines. And then these pictures on the left are a little bit of our grazing operation. This year we bale grazed some difficult spots in our pasture. And we bale graze for many reasons, but before we bale graze, I would put it in a spreader like that. If you don't have a spreader like that, walking through like the lady from Sound of Music, it works. Just get the biology on the soil. Like, this doesn't have to be precision application, folks. Just get the biology on the soil, nature will do the rest. But we just spread it out, and then we bale graze with the sheep over, and then in the wintertime, that hay, the residual hay that the sheep leave, kind of helps protect the biology and also adds more to that soil armor. If you're looking for a local source of castings, drive down to Hutch or order online from Fed and Happy. That's who I get all of mine from. The owner's name is Dan Rager. He is a wealth of information. If you ever get the chance to go visit his operation, they have public events. I would recommend you go. It's pretty impressive. It's not just worm castings, which is poop, by the way. It is a whole lot of other biology that he is bringing into the operation. So when you buy a product from him, you're getting a whole lot of biology. And I'm not affiliated with Dan, we're just friends. So we started making compost in 2020. Compost is very labor intensive. It's worth it. I've had some wins and some losses. I've learned a lot about what to do and what not to do. I am not a compost expert. I made some compost that was definitely biologically active, and it could have been more biologically active. One of the wins was I had really hot piles for a while. One of my piles lit on fire. It was that hot. It happens. I did have some difficulty with residual herbicide. You can do a simple test by mixing your compost with half potting soil and then planting beans and peas and see what comes up. I planted some beans that had about an 85% germination rate when I tested them, and then I put them in this mix and I dropped to 30. So you have to be aware of what you're doing, aware of what you're bringing onto the farm, and figure out how to fix it. Biology will fix it. I did not brew tea with this compost because I knew it wasn't as biologically active as it could have been, also because I had worm castings. But I did use compost from my pile that didn't have residual herbicide residue as top dressed on my beds. And then this picture on the left is Brad spreading compost in greenhouse 2. And when you price compost, you'll understand the value of what happened right there. And you can see the difference when you look in the greenhouse 2 that we're building right now. It's just this gorgeous black, and I feel bad because it's sitting fallow right now, and we're gonna like trample all over it while we build, but it's there, and I'm excited. This year, Brad will be building a Johnson Sioux bioreactor. When we do that, we will make tea or extract out of it for applying to seeds, seedlings, through the drip lines and the sprinklers. So IMOS. Has anybody heard of Kelly and Deanna Lazinski? Oh, it hasn't raised his hand. Okay. You need to Google these folks. You need to listen to what they have to say. That's their picture. They farm in North Dakota. The context in North Dakota is very different than what we have here. I wouldn't say it's easier. They grow large-scale small grains. They're regenerative farmers. They no-till. They also sell whole grain products, flour products, and pastas and mustard. Out of all of my presentation, I have one affiliation for monetary gain, and that's with Guardian Grains. Just so you know. They were my friends before I was an affiliate with them. I fully support them, and they are supporting me. Well, they have fully weaned off of all synthetic inputs on their farm. We're talking thousands of acres here, using indigenous microorganism solution. Deanna, in the picture, her motto is people need better, not more, in all things. So that right there is an IMOS brewer. Brad and I built it for, I don't know, Brad, what do you think we spent on that, 200 bucks? It was easy to do. And then you can see our brewer set up in our water closet at the farm. So what is IMOS? There's an educational series on their website that you can buy. It's worth $457 or $97. I promise it's worth it. If you don't want to spend that, you can hire me to help you. Both help Kelly and Deanna. So what IMOS is you go take the probiotics that are already in nature. You take soil from specific parts of healthy parts of the ecosystem. I brought it home. I cut all the roots up to stimulate an immune response. So the endophytes, which is the bacteria and the biology that's in the soils, went out. We fed it with prebiotics to stimulate more growth of more biology. We put it in these tubs, kept it moist, let it grow. You can see some of the fungal growth, and then we brew it for 24 hours with a specific set of foods and air that's aerated, and you brew with live water from a living source, like a pond that's healthy, so you get cyanobacteria. Long story short, cyanobacteria fixes nitrogen for you. And then you apply it. Kelly and Deanna bioprime all of their seed. I haven't gotten to bioprime yet. We've been spraying ours on the pasture. Spraying is a time eater. Eventually we will get to bioprime seed and we'll put it through the drill. And that's a picture of my son and my nephews collecting indigenous microorganisms to grow and to brew. So on biopriming, the seed is the perfect carrier of biology. So seed treatments kill biology. That's all I'm going to say about that. If you bioprime your seed, you have less work in the long time and less logistics like time on the sprayer and fuel for the sprayer. I also have future plans of getting a microscope to look at not just the biology of my soil and my compost, but the biology of this brew. Oh, I was supposed to get the affiliate link. I didn't do that. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. I'll send you my affiliate link. There's educational resources you can buy from them food-wise, and you can also buy IMOS kits for them. Now, Kelly and Deanna don't just have the 30-gallon brewers. Those are like one 30-gallon brew, bioprimes an entire truckload of seed for them. So that's, thousands of acres, a couple thousand acres. But you can get a 5-gallon brewer, and it's set up for the small producer. I'm also doing research with Kelly and Deanna Lazinski. When they started their journey, they started in their high tunnel, and they realized, oh, this works, and they scaled it up to their thousands of acres. Well, they didn't collect data. They actually don't do any soil testing on their farm now. And so they reached out to me and they said, hey, will you test your soil before and after so we can show people what it actually, an example of what it actually brings to the table? And I said, shoot, heck yeah. So diversity of insects. You need safe spaces for pollinators and other bugs. You can introduce bugs early on. I had a lot of aphid problems because I didn't have a fully functioning ecosystem. I don't know that I'm still too fully functioning, but I had huge aphid problems. And so I would buy in ladybugs. There are some purists out there that say it's a terrible idea, but it helped me. And for me, it was better to include more biology than to kill other biology. That's what worked for me. I plant things that attract predatory wasps. I put buckwheat in almost every single of one of my mixes in or near the greenhouse. If you build it, they will come. If they have food and water and shelter, they will stay. You want a diversity of bugs. Mindset is key. Instead of, oh shit, there's bugs, say, train your brain to be curious about what the bug is, what the bug does for you, what the bug does for environment, before you start pulling out any of your tools. Why is this bug here and what is it doing? I highly recommend that you get an identification app on your phone and get nerdy about identifying all the bugs and all the animals and all the insects you come across. A loop magnifier is a simple, cheap tool that you can purchase. You can get them for your phones, or you can just get a little handheld one. A lot of times they have a light. You can get them for like $5 to help you carry around in your pocket, look at things, figure out what they are. The more healthy your soil gets, the more healthy your plants get. Pests, they don't like healthy plants. They love unhealthy plants. Eventually you'll have less pests because of healthy plants and healthy soil, and because you're balancing your ecosystem. Your predators and your beneficials are here to save the day. We have food. I already talked about getting a microscope. This spring we have beehives coming to our farm. I'm so excited. We already had wild bees. Across the street from us, there's like a big tree native area. And so we've already had bees, several different kinds of bees. I'm constantly taking thousands and millions of pictures of bugs and bees. And so I'm excited to have a honey crop maybe this year. That picture in the middle, it looks really terrible. Does anybody know what's going on there? So it's a cover crop, and that's a radish that's been ravaged by aphids. And it's hard to see it, but there's baby ladybugs all over it. And so I just let it be, because it's a cover crop and I'm not going to pull it out. We just let the ladybugs show up and take it down. Now that doesn't mean if I have a whole infestation of aphids on my kale that I'm not gonna spray some castile soap on it and knock them back and wait for the ladybugs to show up, but they usually do. Those are all pictures taken on my farm. Okay, so this video won't play, but that is those are 2 dung beetles rolling poop. And I had told somebody a while back that this was last year sometime, I had told somebody that I didn't have any dung beetles yet. My husband said, well, yes, you do. And I said, no, I didn't. He goes, well, I saw some in the pasture. I was like, you should take a picture or call me. Dung beetles are indicator species. And so he finally got this video, and what you can't see on here is, I think it was Snapchat, it said, told you. But literally, I was doing cartwheels in the pasture the day that this happened. Who knows more about me that can say they're an indicator of what? They're an indicator species for the health of the ecosystem. When they go away, you have big problems. Is that okay? Yeah. So diversity in plants, I think you kind of already got the idea. There's a whole lot going on in that picture, multiple different types and families of plants. There's weeds, there's pollinators, there's flowers in that picture. They're down there. In this picture over here, those are sunflowers. I start a few earlier in the greenhouse so I can get a succession of flowers. But to add diversity, when I have these sunflowers in these larger containers, at the bottom of them, once the sunflowers are up, I'll put a nasturtium or some zinnia in there, and then you just transplant the whole thing into wherever you're growing it. And then this is an example at the end of my beds in my greenhouse. In between every bed, I plant an herb or a flower that just stays for several reasons. It's for the bugs, it's habitat, it's food, but it's also for my joy. And so those are some poppies that overwintered and popped back. I have poppies blooming right now in the greenhouse, and it's, when you walk in and you see vibrant orange and white blooms, you just can't help but smile. I had a visitor to the greenhouse, and they're like, oh, this is wasted space. And I said, I wholeheartedly 100% disagree. This is not wasted space. And in between those poppies, we'll plant a lot of mint. The other thing that's important about plant diversity is diversifying profits and also risk deterrence. If you grow one crop, even if you're only feeding yourself and that one crop fails for a multitude of possible reasons, you're going to feel failure really, really bad. But if you grow 10 crops that you can manage healthily and one of them fails, you still have 9 things to eat. And that is success. In nature, not everything is successful all the time, and not everything grows all the time. Some years you have nature has bumper crops of one thing and not the other. For me, diversity is also about diversifying my income stream. For homesteaders, it would be about a diverse array of growing how many pounds of nutrition per acre. Also, perennial crops build wealth, be it plants or animals. And they don't just build wealth that you can harvest, they build wealth in the soil. Okay. So this family photo has been edited to make most everything around us look green. And I wish I had the unedited version, because that is us in the asparagus patch last year. It looks like a chaos garden because that's what it is. I can identify sunflowers, I can identify several other asterae family plants, I can identify several weeds, I can identify the asparagus, I can see the zinnias, I can see the tomatoes, I can see some of the leaves of the greens crop. It looks crazy, but it was fantastic. Yep. In that picture, there are tomatoes, flowers, greens, herbs, asparagus, weeds, onions, beets, and garlic, and not a single pest or disease issue out there last year. Any questions?
All of that vegetable in between
Mm-hmm.
your wheat and your asparagus.
Yeah, so the asparagus are on 5 or 6 foot centers. I spaced them out wide, knowing that I was probably going to come in with another perennial crop and or other annual crops. And then when I tested that soil last spring and thought, oh, this is the best place to grow, we're going to use this, I would hand weed down my line and transplant, and then weed or flame weed around them. And then just with the walking, it would keep it down, and then a foot over, you just had wild going. And there were times there at the end of the summer where things encroached on the tomatoes, but they just kept on going. So, hold on just one moment. The greens that I was growing in the middle of August, they didn't wilt. They didn't have problems because they were shaded. And I watered it about half as much, so, as everywhere else outside.
Can you recommend resources for soil remediation from heavy metals or petrochemicals?
I need you to email me that. I can't recommend them off the top of my head. I have some stuff at home in my office, and I know who to reach out to help you. So animal impact. for soil health. Animals in our pasture. We borrowed animals at first before we had sheep. We brought my dad's cows in to graze off our cover crop. And then we brought in domestic sheep, but we also have wild animals, and I accept and love them all for their impact and their contributions to our ecosystem. Sheep are tasty, they feed ourselves, they help us make an income, they help with healing our soil and adding diversity. They also brought their own diversity to our farm from Jayco. They cycle nutrients, and like I said, they build wealth. In the future, we plan to add more diversity of animal impact to the pasture. We are dreaming of things like chicken layer tractors, meat bird tractors, possibly beef and pork. Before I worked at Jayco, I was afraid of pigs because I raised pigs in a conventional setting and they were mean. Like serious trauma. And the first time I went out in Jayco, they sent me down to where the pigs were in a silvopasture setting with a skid steer and a tote of whey to feed them. And those pigs were friendly. And I pulled into where the pigs were, and I had to get out of the skid steer to open the tote to put it into where they would drink it out, and I had a panic attack because all these friendly pigs were surrounding me, and I stood there having panic because I was afraid of pigs. And now I love pigs because I know how great they are. They're smart, they're kind. I befriended a pig at Jayco. She was one of their sows. Her name was Oasis. She was huge. And it was my job when I was pregnant working at Jayco to go walk the river and look for her to see if she'd farrowed yet. And when she farrowed, she let me pick up whole and hold every single one of her babies because we had a connection. Things can change, your soil can change, and you can change. I squirreled. We're also looking into guardian animals for our sheep because at the home farm we have woven wire perennial fence, which helps with some deterrence of predators, but we take our animals to other pastures and we're going to take them to more pastures in the future. We're still working through adding animal impact in the greenhouse. In that research project I talked about, I actually simulated animal impact with the warm season cover crop that was in there. Instead of weed eating it down, I did this, pulled it, like pretended I was an animal, and I spit and I stomped and I went out to the pasture and picked up poop, spread it all around, stomped it in. I just didn't pee because, can't do that. Well, I am growing human food and people will freak out about that. Someday I'm going to figure out how to run chickens and rabbits in the greenhouse during the off season for nutrient addition, for adding diversity, for growing wealth. Joel Salatin is a great person to look into. He's a great author, he's a great speaker to look into, to learn about adding diversity with animals. Animals make more than an impact on soil. I think you can see it in the smiles and the faces. My first aha moment when I started reading and learning about soil health principles and how animals fit into the picture was with the spring and summer after we had kept bottle calves in our fenced-in garden at our first home. There were spots that were greener, there were spots that grew healthier and more plants, and I figured it out. Animals can and will teach you a lot. We didn't start with cattle because I didn't want to invest in the infrastructure and I don't like being run over by a cow. We started with sheep. They require less infrastructure, and sheep pencil out to better profitability numbers. Sheep are fantastic at converting what many people call weeds into nutrition and pounds per acre of production. So this could be a whole hour in itself. Tools for animal impact. This is what we have. That red Speedrite is our fencer. We're on 20 acres. That's a whole lot of fence for 20 acres. But guess who respects the fence? The sheep. I think when I put the tester to our electric fence, it usually runs 8.5 to 9.5 kV. Is that kilovolts, honey? That's a hot fence. Recommend that you keep, if you're going to use electric wired fence or netted fence, to stay on top of your fence. Because once an animal learns to disrespect your fence, it's hard to unlearn that. We cull animals very aggressively on our farm. If you don't perform, if you're not a good mom, if you don't respect the fence, and you have less resistant to parasites, you're out. It sucks. Those are hard decisions to make, especially if you connect with those animals, but you have to do it for our own sanity. You can see me holding the reel. I chose that picture is because I can run a reel out with a 1-year-old on my hip. It doesn't make it easy, but it is doable. You can see kind of our setup. When we bale graze in the wintertime, we make long, skinny paddocks with reels, and then we run reels across to put them in smaller sections, and then we roll out the hay bale. Yes, we're rolling out hay bales by hand. We borrow a skid steer, we borrow a bale bed, we set the hay bales strategically right now. Eventually, we're going to buy a bale and roller from, is it Jim Garish, honey? No, Greg Judy. But yeah, we set the bales strategically, and then we push them out. Like I said, I don't need a gym membership, and neither will you. And then that's a picture of Jayco. There's a whole lot of fencing there, but you can't see it very well. You can see all the white posts. Those are end posts and line posts. And then that picture right there is a picture of automatic water. Our water at our farm, we don't have buried line yet. That's something that's happening in the future, is buried water line, that we can have water connection points. We just run a garden hose out. We hook it to an old mineral tub that has a float in it. We can use that all year round. There's 3 or 4 weeks that we might turn it off so we don't have to fix anything frozen. Sheep are very water conservative animals. It's easy to haul water to sheep in comparison to cows. We also took an old IBC tote that had organic molasses on it and mounted it on a trailer for hauling water, and it's not bad at all. Questions? We're almost there. Okay. This was a last-minute addition at just before lunch today. This is change that I could identify with my free tools. Does anybody know what you're looking at here? This is a core sample. This is my soil probe. This is out of the greenhouse. And it's 6 to 8 inches, even though I just photographed most of the top. What do you see at the top? What is that? That's new soil. It can be done. There are old ways of speaking and knowing that say this can't be done, that this takes thousands of years, and it doesn't. Last year when I pulled this picture was taken just a few weeks ago when I pulled my spring samples out of the high tunnel. When I took this sample out of the high tunnel last spring, I had about that much of black on top, and boy, I was excited. I knew that some of that was from my top dress, from my worm castings, some, not very little. But when I pulled that sample across the beds of the greenhouse, it was either in between 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep across the greenhouse, and I was like, well, I'm done for today. I'm done. Just so happy. I'm just going to walk around with stars in my eyes. And I have pretty good soil to start with. Like I said, I know people who are farming subsoil, they have really heavy clay. I have sandy loam. I really do have nice soil to begin with in the grand scheme of things. But that was exciting. And like I said, you don't need a soil probe to pull soil samples. You can use a spade. You can see this. You can use all of your tools. This soil smells good. I didn't taste this exact soil, but it probably tastes good. It feels good. I can hear the biology around going. It sounds good. Use your free tools, folks. Ray says, to recap, everything is connected. Look and see how everything is connected. Humans, animals, water, carbon, soil, everything. Soil is alive. It's a complex ecosystem. It is an aquatic ecosystem. It's not just a growing medium, and sadly in many schools they're still teaching that it is just a growing medium. The goal is to mimic nature's design. The goal is not to grow produce. The goal is not to fill your cells and your tummies. The goal is not to have an Instagram-worthy hobby or farm. The goal is not to make money. All of those things come as a result of mimicking nature, which is the goal. Regeneration starts with your heart and mind. I started this journey in the wrong place. I started it trying to fix something. I started it as a critical care nurse who was going to just nitpick and fix every little thing. I didn't understand connection, and I didn't understand the goal, and I do now. Once I understood the goal and had the right mindset, things accelerated really fast. That's why I'm here today, and that's what I'm most grateful for, is how fast things have accelerated in the last 12 months. I started this journey some years ago. I thought I was healing our 20 acres. Turns out I'm doing that and so much more. Thank you for lending me your ear. Thank you for asking me your questions, and thank you for helping me to learn more. I don't really have a lot to say about these. They speak for themselves. The only thing that's not on here is just do it. Just plant the cover crop. Just order the cover crop. Just start the no-till. Just grow your first bunch of lettuce. Just do something. You're going to learn a lot. You already have the tools you need. Think, learn, act, or do. Use your hands, your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your nose, and your heart. Education comes from work and experience as much as it does from books, podcasts, and articles. That's it. Actually, I lied. That's not it.